It is Kenny's Audio Record Reviews. Thank you very much for viewing my video. As always, please like and subscribe. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. That'll help me out. That'll help my channel analytics out, help my small little channel grow. I really appreciate that. In this video, I'm going to review two jazz albums that's full of jazz legends. All these brothers on this album are just jazz legends. There's no doubt about that. The first two reviews are going to be jazz albums, and the third review is going to be a non-jazz album review. I thought I'd keep that series going. Now, the third album, some of you might think of this as a jazz album, or it might touch on the outer edges of jazz, but I'm going to review it as a non-jazz album because I don't think it fits strongly in the jazz category. You'll know it when I get to it in the last review in this video. And you definitely want to watch your last album review, because I want to ask a very important question about that artist when I get to that review. But I'm going to start with, by the way, I should say this. I say this in a lot of my videos. I don't play music on my channel or my videos because of copyright infringement issues. I don't want my video to be taken down or get a copyright strike from YouTube. I know a lot of people do play music during their videos. I opt not to do that. I'm conservative, at least when it comes to playing music in my videos. But I'm going to review this album. It's called the Joe Farrell Song of the Wind. Now, this album was previously issued. This was a reissue album of the record, of the album, I should say. The original copy was called the Joe Farrell Quartet, the original issue, the Joe Farrell Quartet. And that album was issued in 1970. And I think it had a black and red cover. This is a reissue version of the record called Joe Farrell Song of the Wind. And this version was issued in 1976. This is a reissue of the 1970 release. This album, I'll show you the label first. And this album still has Joe Farrell Quartet on the label. This is a CTI 6067. I believe the original was CTI 6003. And again, this 1976 release was issued on CTI Records. I'll show you the front of the cover and the back as well. Almost identical, to be honest with you. And inside of the gatefold. This album features Joe Farrell, soprano and tenor saxophones, flute and oboe, Chick Corea piano, Jack DeJohnette drums, Dave Holland bass, John McLaughlin guitar. Those are four jazz legends, just no doubt about that. Again, this was issued, the original album was issued in 1970. This was recorded July 1970. I think a few years after that, a couple of years after that, 2-3 years after that, Joe Farrell combined with Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke. They formed Return to Forever. But this album is a sensational jazz performance. It is very cohesive, very tight in terms of the play of the musicians on this album. There's great, I'll show you the song listings before I continue. Hope it comes out on the video. But song 1, side 1, there's a very nice guitar performance by John McLaughlin. And throughout the album, they're really very nice performance, great performance by Joe Farrell. Joe Farrell and all of his instruments that he plays on this album, I believe they're around the left speaker. And his play with Chick Corea on piano was just tremendous on this album. The bass play of Dave Holland and the drumming of Jack DeJohnette, how they, like I say, cohesively play and jam on this record is actually quite good. There's a song, and I forgot if it was Song of the Wind or Motion. One of them is like a free jazz piece that you should definitely check out and listen to. Again, this is a very nice jazz performance, underrated jazz performance. Joe Farrell is a very underrated musician as far as I'm concerned. And this is an album you should definitely check out in terms of great jazz that was recorded in 1970. Again, recorded at Van Gelder Studios, recording engineer Rudy Van Gelder, recorded July 1970. Check this album out. It's a very, like I said, tight, and it represents jazz very well around 1970. A very nice concept for an album. Great musicians. Album you should definitely check out. I'm gonna give the performance a 9 because it's just simply fantastic. The sound, however, I'm gonna discount to like an 8.5. It's not as clear and crystal clear and pristine as I like a stereo recording to be, but it's very good nonetheless. I don't know how many of you out there have the original album. Again, the original album, I think it had a black and red cover. I thought I had it in my collection, but I have this one. I'm glad I have this one because it's a very nice album, a very nice jazz album from 1970. Joe Farrell, Song of the Wind. Performance a 9, sound a 8.5. An album you should definitely check out if you love jazz around 1970. That's a great representation of jazz during that era, in my opinion. The next one I'm going to review in this video, and I listened to this during the same listening session, is this one, the Charles Lloyd Quartet, Dreamweaver. I wanted to review, he has an album called Forest Flower, and I thought I had that in my collection, but I don't, so I'm going to have to buy a reissue version of Forest Flower, because Forest Flower is a tremendous performance by Charles Lloyd. But this album, and by the way, this is a mono version of the album, so I will be reviewing the mono version of the album in this video. I wish I had the stereo version because that would have been a great comparison. And as great as this mono record sounds, now I'm intrigued of the potential of the stereo version of this particular album. This album too has jazz legendary superstars, Charles Lloyd on tenor sax and flute, Keith Jarrett, the legendary Keith Jarrett on piano. In my opinion, he's the greatest piano player who ever lived. I did a video on that. Check it out. Cecil McBee on bass, and the great Jack DeJohnette on drums. This is an all-star quartet, in my opinion. This is a very creative period for Charles Lloyd. If you listen to Charles Lloyd, this album, like I said, Forest Flower, and his music around that time was extremely creative, and they were playing just tremendous acoustic jazz during that era. And you should not sleep on Charles Lloyd and his quartet or quartets during that era, because it was tremendous jazz, and as I said, it's underrated. This mono record sounded quite nice. I have a mono cartridge. I believe it's a Audio-Technica AT33MONO cartridge. If you want to listen to mono, in my opinion, it's cool to have a mono cartridge. Just a personal opinion. That's where mono sounds the best, when you listen to mono on a mono cartridge. I know, listen, you have one of those receivers or preamplifier that has a stereo mono switch. That's okay too. Or if you just want, if you can't afford a mono cartridge, just listen to it on a stereo cartridge, or just get the stereo record. But this record, I'll show you the song listing. Their version, that autumn sequence, sounds sensational, especially their version of Autumn Leaves. What a nice performance by Charles Lloyd. And there's sections of the album, I think it's more so on side 2 and a bit on side 1, where you really get to hear the jazz interpretations, the jazz playing, the jazz stylings of Keith Jarrett around that time. He fit greatly in a jazz quartet. Keith Jarrett is so versatile, he can fit in any setting. I mean, he played jazz fusion with Miles Davis, and he didn't even like jazz electronic instruments. But there's a very nice example of acoustic jazz in 1966. This was issued in 1966 on Atlantic Records. And the songs on side 2, Bird Flight, Love Ship, Sombrero Sam, are very nice songs, very nice compositions that bring out and boost the talent level and skill level of this great Quartet, again, Charles Lloyd tenor sax, Keith Jarrett piano, Cecil McBee bass, Jack DeJohnette drums. What a tremendous performance of acoustic jazz. Even if you're listening to it in mono, I wish I had, I wish I had the stereo version of this record. I really do, because around that time, they were really making really nice stereo recordings. In the late 50s, early 60s, a lot of mono recordings sounded better than stereo. But around this era, stereo was taking over and sounding great. So at some point, I'm going to have to get the stereo version of this record, because a mono sounds quite good, in my opinion. Charles Lloyd Quartet, a fantastic jazz, acoustic jazz recording. All the musicians on the album are playing great. They're, like I said, they're tight, cohesive. It's just tremendous on this record. A record you definitely check out. Charles Lloyd Quartet, Performance 9. It is a mono record using a mono cartridge, Sound 9. An underrated, nice, fantastic performance by the Charles Lloyd Quartet. The album is called Dreamweaver. Check it out. The next album, which is the last album on this video, is going to be a non-jazz record album. Some of you might put this album on the outer edges of the jazz category. I don't. I think it's more of an instrumental pop record. Some might put it in the smooth jazz category, or the, I don't know, funk jazz category. I don't. And some people think of this musician as a jazz musician. To me, not in this particular record. I'm going to say no. At least my opinion. That's Herb Alpert, Rise. Now, please watch the end of this video, because I'm going to ask an important question involving Herb Alpert at the end of this short review. This album was released in 1979. The single Rise came out months before the album. I think the single Rise may have came out late summer 1979, and the album came out late 1979. I bought this album as soon as it was released. I can remember as if it were yesterday. I remember talking to some of my classmates in class about this album. It was my freshman year in college when I purchased this album in 1979. I will show you the song listing. The composition Rise was written by Andy. I think it was written or composed by Andy Armour and Randy Alpert. Randy goes by the nickname Randy Badass Alpert. That's what Herb Alpert calls him in some of the interviews I've heard with Herb Alpert. But the entirety of side one, I should say, the entirety of side one is sensational. 1980, the song 1980, I believe that was written for the 1980 Olympics as a theme, but the United States did not participate in the 1980 Olympics, so I believe it may have been used years later. But Rise was a #1 hit for Herb Alpert. I think it was his first #1 hit since 1968, when he had that hit, This Guy's in Love with You. But Rise, in my opinion, is not the best song on this album. Neither is 1980, neither is Rotation. I think the best song on this album is called, I shouldn't say I think, I know, in my opinion, is called Behind the Rain. Behind the Rain is the best song on this album, in my personal opinion. That's the song that I love, enjoyed, and vibe and groove to the most when this album first came out in 1980. Side 2 is a letdown for me. There's only one good song on side 2. It's the last song on side 2. The first 3 songs on side 2, I don't particularly care for. And because of that, I'm going to discount the performance score on this album. Herb Alpert normally makes complete albums throughout his career. So he fills his albums with songs that are actually good, even during earlier days up through this era. But side 2 was a little bit of a letdown to me. The performance on this album, again, is quite good. I'm going to give the performance a 9. Oh, by the way, this was mastered by Bernie Grundman, recorded in 1979. It says all tunes except 1980 were recorded on the 3M 32-track digital machine and transferred to analog for editing. So this is a digital recording, except for the song. It says 1980. Again, mastered by Bernie Grumman, who did a lot of the A&M mastering during that era. And before that, also, he was mastering, gosh, A&M records for years. Performance of 9. And I had to, like, it would be a little, performance be a little bit higher if side 2 wasn't such a letdown. Performance of 9, sound of 9. This is a sensationally sounding album. However, the song Rotation, I have this 12-inch clear single of Rotation, a 33 1/3 single of Rotation. And the mix on this one, it says this one was remixed. This is a remixed long version of Rotation. This single, this remixed 12-inch single, sounds better than the album version. This is an audiophile version of Rotation. I mean, the album is too, but this is a really audiophile version of Rotation because it's more pristine, clear. The instruments are a little bit more in your face, more defined. If you want to hear Rotation in a version that sounds better than the great sounding album version, the single version sounds better in my opinion. I enjoy this much better than the album version. Herb Alpert, Rise, Performance of 9, Sound of 9. Some of you may think of this as a jazz album on the outer edges of jazz. I don't think so. That was more of a pop record for me, pop instrumental. The question I have about Herb Alpert, what version of Herb Alpert do you like and enjoy the most? Which one do you think is the best? If you were to choose the early 60s, let's say the mid-70s version of Herb Alpert, or the Herb Alpert from 1979 throughout the 80s, you know, the 70s and 60s version of Herb Alpert, you know, he had that hit, Taste of Honey, This Guy Is in Love with You, just so many hits he had in the early 60s and mid-70s. This is the best Herb Alpert album, in my opinion, overall. It's called You Smile, the Song Begins. This is the best album that Herb Alpert has ever done, in my opinion. It's a personal opinion. Or do you like the 1970s, 1980s version of Herb Alpert, like Beyond or Magic Man? Or, you know, those songs he was doing with Lewis and Jimmy Jam, you know, Keep Your Eyes on Me, those type of albums. This album sounds sensational as well. I believe I have a single version of Keep Your Eyes on Me. Keep Your Eyes on Me is a great song. And if you have the 12-inch version, it sounds sensational on an audiophile system. But what version? I don't think this was... What year did this come out? I don't see the year on here. But which version do you think was Herb Alpert's best? 1960, let's say to the mid-70s, where he had those hits, This Guy's in Love with You, A Taste of Honey, The Lonely Bull, or 1970 through the 80s version? Which version do you like? If I were to choose, I would give the slightest edge to the early 60s, mid-70s, but only a slight edge. This version of Herb Alpert in the late 70s throughout the 80s, early mid-80s, he reinvented himself spectacularly and sounded sensational. He really did. But I'm going to give the early 60s to the mid-70s the edge, but only slightly, because he played tremendous in the late 70s, early 80s. Please leave your comments in the comment section below in that regard. That would be interesting. But Herb Alpert, as of the posting date of this video, still touring with his wife, Lanny Hall, I believe. And I think he's approaching 90 years old. He might be 90 years old in a year or two. Still in great shape. I believe he lives out here in Southern California, I think in Malibu, somewhere around that area. Him and his wife have a beautiful home. I think he's an artist, a sculptor, you know, entrepreneur, loans money to charity. What a great man Herb Alpert was. Fabulous for music for years. Herb Alpert, a tremendous talent, tremendous businessman, sensational person. He's living large. He has a beautiful wife, Lanny Hall, living in Malibu. sold A&M records for a ton of money. Herb Alpert, one of all-time greats. Please leave your comments in the comment section below on the albums I reviewed in this video. Please like and subscribe. God bless, strong love, and keep the peace worldwide always.